Welcome, everybody. It's nice to have you here this morning. This morning we're going to talk about inside the experience, the psychology of immersive design. We've got quite a distinguished panel here today. First off, Linda Durnell, and she's the partner at Madison Lane Consulting, and she's studying the human factor in immersion interface design. Next to Linda, we have Anna Bowman. She's a media psychology PhD student at Fielding Graduate University, and she's specializing in location-based augmented reality and social advocacy. Then next to Anna, we have Tunisia Singleton, almost Dr. Tunisia Singleton. She's with Jab Cross Media, as I said, a PhD candidate, and she also has the 3 E's, emotion, engagement, and experience, as in virtual reality experience. And her specialty is in the sports market. And finally, next to Tunisia, we have Dr. Gary Hare from Scepter. He visualizes real-time information and specifically towards environmental data. So first off, we're going to have Linda Durnell speak to us about the human factor of immersive interface design.
Thanks, Jerry. So how many people have upgraded their iPhone in the last month to that big upgrade? All I can say about that is how could something so right go so horribly wrong? I mean, in fact, I could probably end my presentation on that note alone, because that is a perfect example of interfaces and how they affect human behavior. And what's really interesting about the Apple thing is Apple actually directed our behavior to begin with in a certain way so that we always swiped right to get a particular outcome. And then they go and they change the interface, which changes our behavior, which causes us to feel very vulnerable and very upset. And that's why it's been such a big deal. Again, not understanding human behavior and changing the interface just because I think they thought it was time for something new. So as you can see here, interface design ends up expressing itself in the outer layers of a product or service. Now, it isn't a surprise that we will access technology by voice. We already are. It's not a surprise that we wear sensors, to monitor our behavior. We all have them. I bet everybody in here has them. I know Pam's got 2 on one wrist. And, or that government's been using VR for decades. Not a surprise there. But it was surprising that people ran into traffic to catch a Pokemon. Now, I don't think that the people in AR understood really what that meant. So I think what's interesting is that we view computers in a lot of the ways that we view people. Now, that could be helpful, intelligent, annoying, or just plain crazy. Now, when interfaces are crazy, it's sort of like a political candidate being crazy. I walk away because I've got this motto that you just can't manage crazy. And interfaces, when they're crazy, they affect human behavior in a very deep and profound way most of the time. So we do have some unintended consequences. And interfaces that evoke what I would call an artificial state of constant crisis through constant interruptions and notifications is establishing a really dangerous precedent in immersive interfaces as they become more common. When an interface is really complex or obscure, we need to be aware of the neurophysiological effects on our behavior. One of those is cognitive overload. We all know that we live in a world of distraction, and making a decision in the midst of a strong emotional state may contribute, as research has found, to a suboptimal choice. So when you're watching the debates tonight, be aware of that. And, but there's also a risk of information and emotional overload as well. Now, there's something else that I think is really interesting because, I'm always asking, what are we unaware of, especially with interfaces? Because what don't we know? Well, this is really interesting because most people have experienced some sort of visual spinning indicator of a processing weight. Now, how many people back in the 80s remember the little hourglass with Apple? Ah, you're old, you're old. And I do too. But you know what? It was really great. We were like, okay, we're waiting. But what was really super interesting is that research has found that people actually prefer it when the machine takes its time. Now, some of you are going, no, I don't like it at all. But in the case of when something is happening that is deemed important to us, so if we're searching for medical information, or mortgage rates, or insurance quotes, or something that we think, hey, this is really important, that optimized weighting, they are building it into the interfaces so that we actually go, okay, here we go, this is really important, and we trust the information more. In fact, in research, they found that the people actually leaned into their computer when the findings finally arrived. Now, we all know in the industry that with algorithms and with processing speeds, we get information in nanoseconds. But it's a part of an interface that's built in to help human behavior understand and feel comfortable about the information that's coming in. So, and it's actually an example called the labor illusion. There's also another hidden cost sort of all these interfaces, and that is based on symbols. Now, when you set up an interface based on symbols, you know, most of the time they hope, the people that are designing it, that you understand what the symbol is. Now, we all know what this symbol is because there are people out here that are digital natives, people that are actually born into technology, and then the rest of us are digital immigrants where we really are conversant in technology. We get it, we understand it, but we weren't born into it. Well, there are some people, like my 70-year-old neighbor, who called me recently and said, which is why I put this slide up there, my computer's not working, can you help? Of course, I went over there. Well, she didn't understand what this symbol meant. She just didn't get it. She didn't understand that her Wi-Fi was off. So when you're designing interfaces and they keep changing the symbols, people are going to be going, well, wait a minute, I don't understand that. I don't know what that is. It's not a given. So it's really important that we understand that sometimes we have to unlearn and create new associations with symbols, and they can be confusing. So when we look at the interface of tomorrow, we have to recognize that people live in smart homes, we drive smart cars, we go to offices that are smart offices. And as such, the key, I think, going forward is to reduce the friction from our encounter with machines so that it actually helps our behavior with less friction is probably the best way I could put it. And requiring full attention to browse through those icons and those menus is just going to be passé because in the future there's not going to even be a touch screen. There's going to be no technology that's visible at all. In fact, when VR is done well, the interface completely disappears. How many people have had VR experiences? Exactly. If you really think back to the most effective ones, there was no interface. You were in the midst of it, no interface at all. And I think that's what you're going to start seeing as we move forward. Now, this is interesting too, that the interface of tomorrow will also be dominated by natural language communication. Now you're saying, well, we already have that. Yeah, you can talk to Siri all day long. Yes, we do. However, what's interesting about Echo and Alexa and those types of things is that it's filling an emotional void in people. And humans are actually forming emotional bonds with what we're calling social technology. So we're interacting with interfaces and it's having a therapeutic effect. So when we look at interfaces going forward, we're looking at Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Apple, and Samsung when they have the time, working towards conversation-based interfaces. Now, this could bring really profound changes in how we use and interact with computers. Now, conversation is quirky because we know when we talk to each other, or you're even listening to me, it's quirky. But it's how humans interact. If it's how humans interact, it's how humans should interact with machines. So what we're going to see going forward in human-centered interfaces, all kinds of stuff. I'm not going to go through it all, but I will give you a couple latest developments. And last week, Toyota, I don't know if you heard, announced a robot child. And this is designed to appeal to those people who are childless in Japan. And then Hasbro just introduced last week a line of pet robots for the elderly. So what you're seeing are these interfaces are being designed with human behavior in mind. And I'm going to leave you with a couple things. One, interfaces and their impact have an impact on behavior without a doubt. And I think it's leading us to almost a rethinking of what is possible and also what is best for us as we use them going forward. And so the last two things, interface design, I believe, two good takeaways, begins with conversation, number one. And two, it must be deeply, deeply rooted in an understanding of human behavior for it to be effective for us. So anyway, thank you so much.
Thank you, Linda. So next up is Anna Bowman. She's going to be talking to us about UNESCO project with the World Heritage Sites and augmented reality headsets. Come on up, Evan.
Hi guys. So my project that I'm going to be talking about today is the beginnings of my dissertation research, and what I am interested in looking at is how we can use augmented reality headsets, things like transparent lenses with overlaid information, to advocate for sites that are currently being threatened by terrorist groups such as ISIS. And I'm going to start by introducing this video of what the Meta augmented reality headset is. Do you want to see if it'll come through on mine?
Can't trust those interfaces. That was going to be my follow-on discussion later if anyone wants to really hear the rant on them. I wonder if I did something. I was wondering if I did anything up there.
Pardon? Yeah.
So does anyone have any questions about the interfaces? Anybody want to rant about Apple's upgrade? I'm so happy to hear it. Yes. Yes. Yes.
It's an app right now that we're going to make for Apple, but if we make it for Android as well, will interface actions have to be different? You think, do you find the technology and the usage for Android users the same as Apple users?
I would think that it would be. I mean, human behavior, if we're really looking at how human behavior interacts with those interactions and what you choose to create, human behavior is pretty, standard, unless it's a cultural difference. But I think you're looking at early adopters and users of mobile devices, and I would think that it would apply on both.
Actually, both companies will provide you data on how their users use their devices. And it may be very similar, but you can use that data to say, are there differences I need to take into consideration? Jerry Lynn?
Yeah. It's loud. It's loud. Go ahead.
Just to leapfrog off your last comment, two major HMD manufacturers like HTC
I'm sorry, if you could raise your voice a little bit.
Yeah, sorry. Major HMD manufacturers in the VR space, such as Oculus, HTC, Samsung, have similar psychological data on their users.
Well, the answer to that is a little bit, and the other answer is, question is, do they share it? If you have been on some of the panels yesterday, one of the things that was discussed was the ability of VR to automatically collect data on user behavior, everything from eyesight tracking to attention to all that kind of stuff. And so that data is being collected. There's an ethical panel we can have on that, by the way. The question is to what extent the data is shared. And I would guess that with many of the newer companies, that data is tightly held. And ultimately, as they start to open things to far more developers, it will probably be much like it is today with Apple, where the data is available to you.
So we're going to go ahead and get started. We're going to go ahead and get started back to Anna. She's got a very visual presentation, so certainly if folks want to see some of these things afterwards, we can share those with you at the fielding booth. But she's going to tell you about her project that she's doing with UNESCO and Meta. Go ahead, Anna.
Okay, so basically what Meta is it's a augmented reality headset that you can put on, and it will have interactive hologram capabilities where you're actually able to interact with the holograms that are in front of you. It also has a 360 field of view, so you're able to move around and interact with your environment. So my project is focused on how we could use the augmented reality headset to digitally restore sites that have currently been destroyed by ISIS and other terrorist groups like the Taliban in the past. My slides did show you guys a really cool visual image of a temple in Syria that is currently, it's a UNESCO site that's been demolished by ISIS. The visuals provided a satellite image of what the structure looked like before terrorist interaction, and then what it looked like afterward. It was basically demolished to rubble. By utilizing the Meta headset, you're able to physically, place yourself in that environment to where you're standing in front of this structure, and you're able to either peel it like an onion and watch as it's been built from the ground up back in its glory days and when it was thriving. You're also able to see the destruction and demolition that happened once ISIS came in and basically blew these sites up. So the psychological factor that comes into play here is emotional engagement and response, and how we're able to elicit empathy out of these experiences for people. So it not only will prompt people currently into wanting to learn more about these UNESCO sites, but it'll also provide people a way to understand what has happened historically in the past, not only in their specific culture, but in cultures around the world. So right now there are 1,031 UNESCO sites, but there are many, many more that are awaiting classification. It's just a matter of discovering some of them. Some of them are pyramids in the Amazon rainforest that are still under jungle. There's all sorts of sites all around the world. So the way that we would be able to use Meta would be education, entertainment, time traveling experiences where you're able to actually hold the whole globe in your hand. You can pick one of the sites that's got a little light lit up around the globe, and then you're able to zoom right in, and you can kind of peel back the experience, choose your own adventure, historically based, to learn more about the site in a fully immersive and interactive way. And that is about it. I had a lot of slides that I would have loved to show you guys, and I also had a great video.
Thank you, Anna. And like Linda said, those technology interfaces, right?
We have Fielding University has a booth up in that other place, and then Anna will be up there, and if you guys want to see all of her stuff, because she's got some really great things she put together, and you did a really great job under trying technical circumstances.
Absolutely.
So next we have Tunisia Singleton. She's going to speak to us. Yes, she deserves a woo.
With your banana.
And those of you that have heard Tunisia speak before, you know she deserves a woo. All right, so she's going to speak about virtual fandemonium, optimizing experience with psychology and immersive design.
Great. Thank you. Hopefully technology will agree with me as well.
It's going to
It's
just
going
fine,
to.
yeah?
We're talking sports, but not that locker room talk. Sorry. It was way too easy. I just had to. Well, I know we've all been attending a lot of conferences lately, and there's a lot of buzzwords going around: immersion, presence, AR, VR, experience. But what we need to do is we need to take a step back, I think, and really look at what these concepts mean in the context of advanced technology. So what this presentation is going to do is try and offer up a definition of the word experience and look at how, bless you. One more? No, okay. We're going to offer up a definition of experience and try and look at how experiences are constructed in sports using the devices of immersive technology and psychology. And then with time being allotted, I'll also dive into some of the principles of best design practices. It's something that I call the 3 E's that Jerry Lynn mentioned earlier. So what is this experience that we speak of? We've heard a lot about the need of an experience strategy and the need of strategic research in and of itself, but what exactly is an experience? To me, an experience is a sensation. It's the state of being emotionally and aesthetically connected to something. To me, experience is the thumbprint of your identity that's made up of your perceptions, your memories, your feelings, your values, and that makes you who you are. So therefore, that's why the psychology research is important, because then you can start to figure out and anticipate what type of experiences your particular audience is going to expect. Now, in the sports market, there are 2 different perspectives that are very important in looking at the sport experience. The first being an emotional perspective, in the emotional context. That's your needs, your values, your goals, and you can start to see some of the purchase patterns based on those things because of the brand affiliates that are always associated in the ad revenue that is in sports market. And once you get into the tribal sense of things, you can start to see the belonging and the collection, or the connection and the group membership that is so important to what a sport experience is. You're part of a team. Your language changes. This is my team. We are going to win. We're going to defeat them. And then as soon as the team loses, like, they suck. Are you kidding me? We distance ourselves from them. That's because of the emotional context that we have with teams and players and franchises and leagues. It goes on multiple levels. This is a multi-dimensional experience when you're looking at sport. The thing is, though, when being a sports fan isn't a new concept, though, right? Sports isn't anything necessarily new. What is, though, are the ways that we identify and experience with sport. And that's influenced by the digital context and the digital perspective. There's new devices, there's new apps, there's new platforms, there's new screens. We're using multiple screens at the same time, so therefore our expectations are changing, our behaviors are changing, the way that we consume the media is changing. So that all has to do with, once you trace these patterns of media consumption and human behavior, you can start to see how these 2 things all combine and forge a sport experience that makes it the #1 ad space in the global media market. Now, when you look at the evolution of sports media consumption in general, we can see a pattern of human activity that makes us want to get closer to the game, closer to the action. And it started in 1911 with a college football game between Kansas and Missouri, where it was broadcast via Western Union telegrams. There were 1,000 or so people that stood and sat in an auditorium and watched a play-by-play mechanical reproduction of the game. So as soon as the telegram came, there was a guy whose job it was to move the play. It's like, oh, running back 10 yards, first down. And then they all cheered just like as if they were at that game. And then you go into the first sports broadcast on radio in 1921, a heavyweight boxing fight with Jack Dempsey, and it was considered the largest audience at that time, with some thousands of people listening over the radio. And then to the first time that sports was broadcast on TV, 1936 Summer Olympic Games, where over 72 hours of content was transmitted. And to now into the more modern era where we have obviously HD, now we're doing multiple screens at a time, we're live streaming games on Twitter every Thursday, and we're watching them now in virtual reality. All of this is possible. But when you look at these patterns of media consumption and how we're changing, you can see that it's starting to get more immersive. We're starting to get more engaged with the media. We're starting to become more involved with the game itself. We're getting closer and closer and closer to this game. So virtual reality is that gateway that enables new experiences and perspectives and capabilities. VR represents a turning point in media consumption where it's no longer necessarily about storytelling, but about story living. I'm getting closer. I'm going to be inside. I'm going to be living this experience now. Because when you think about it, sports has like that linear narrative where you have a beginning, middle, and end, sure. But now there's also a choose-your-own-adventure style where you can dive as deep as possible into the story world that is of sports. And VR is a conduit to these experiences, just one of the tools that you can use. So when you think about a car, it can't go anywhere without somebody driving it. So if you think about it, let technology be the car and story be what's driving it. If virtual reality is the car, it's the experience that's driving the technology, that's making the technology relevant. Bells and whistles of technology will change all the time. We have conferences every 3 months because of it. What doesn't change are the innate human desires of psychology. Our innate desires to be storytellers, to be creative beings, to be expressive, to want experiences. Those are the type of things that don't ever change. So if you study that psychology, you can inform the design of what audience you're trying to target and what content you're immersively trying to create. So when you look at the sports experiential media ecosystem, I created this map to try and show how multidimensional it is. And there are 3 major fields. The first is community, and that represents that belonging, that group membership, those connections, those values. And it's a major social influencer. You may want to watch a game, and you may want to go to a Packers bar, or you want to tailgate the Dodgers game because you want to be with your people. Or you're a Laker fan because your husband, your partner, your spouse is a Lakers fan, so by default you are, and you just don't really have a team. Those are influencers for sometimes of how you can become affiliated with sport. And the center is the self, and all of these overlap with with one another. But for the self, that's when you're getting into the intrinsic values of why I watch sport, what it means to me, the possession self-link, and how you get self-worth from basking in the reflected glory of others. That's a part of the self. And then we have the organization, which is more of the corporate influencers. So that's where you have your brands, your affiliates, your sponsors, your endorsers, and you want to be a part of everything that's associated with your player, your team, your franchise, your league, whatever level, however deep you want to go into this transmedia brand that is sport. Cristiano Ronaldo, I think, just generated $200 million worth of revenue for his brand sponsors just because of his social media presence and the content that he puts out there. That's a lot of cheese. So when you think about it, the corporate influencers, there's a lot of power there. And of course, we're always talking about monetizing and wanting to make money. Don't forget that when you study the identification of sport consumers, they're likely to dive into this pot, and you're able to make some money because by affiliation alone, we want to be as close to the action as possible. I want to wear Kobe's shoes. I want to wear this jersey. But just by affiliation, you're simply associated with that. Because of that possession self-link, you get something emotionally back from contributing and from owning things that are affiliated with your team or with your player. And at the bottom, you'll see all of these fields that are merged together. They're accelerated by the new technologies that are happening now. So from social media tools, fan forums, podcasts, fantasy sports. We could do a whole panel on esports and gaming and how that's taking over right now. Second screens, AR, VR, avatars, presence, mass media, events, social venues. We're starting to see now a merged venue experience where they're having immersive dugouts and immersive playing fields actually in these venues themselves. If you go to AT&T where the Giants play, not anymore because they're out, but if you go up there, if you went up, I hope there's no Giants fans in here. You are? Oh, I'm sorry. But next season, you could go to AT&T Park and go inside and see their immersive dugout where they have a VR a setup for fan engagement. And you can put on the headset and you can look in the bullpen, see who's warming up. You can go into the dugout. You can look behind first. You can look from third. You can look from behind home. So, and that's actually while you're at the game. So this isn't like you're at home on the couch watching via Next VR or something like that. But you're actually in the stadium experience in your hat and you're using these type of technologies. So this is the type of stuff that's going to be in the future. Absolutely. So this technological momentum, it affects all three of these fields between community, self, and organization. So now I'll dive into the principles of design strategy, those 3 E's that have been ringing around here lately. So the first one is emotion. And with emotion, you have to get into the identity of your consumers at that point, and you can start to see that a strongly committed person identifies with them because they enjoy the membership of it. There are 3 components of commitment that have to do with why someone wants to be affiliated with another organization. Organizational psychology largely was done to see how can they retain employees at an organization. All right, how do I have somebody, I don't want this guy to bounce from job to job to job to job. How do I keep somebody employed at this level and with me? One, you pay them well, but also they have to buy into the brand story. They have to believe in what they're doing. And there are components of commitment that reflect these type of values. And the first one is affective. I want to be here. It's the same thing with sports fans. Sports fans aren't just simple consumers anymore. They're producers. There's a cognitive surplus. We're producers. We're members of an organization. It's a team. Like there may be 15 on a basketball team, but there's a 16th man. Like there's us. We're a part of the team as well. So the affective attachment, that means like I want to do this. I want to be a part of this. I want to be involved. I want to tailgate this Dodgers game so I can be with my people. I want to be a part of this game. I want to go to this bar. I want to do this. The second is continuance, which is need. It shows that there's a recognized cost associated if I discontinue these acts. So I have a lucky jersey that I need to wear or they're going to lose the game. I need to tailgate. I need to watch this game. It's not an option necessarily because if they don't, they're going to be missing out therefore. And that's emotionally taxing. And the third is normative, which is should or ought. I have a responsibility to do this. It's my duty to do this as a fan. I have to watch the game. It's not an option. It's like I should out of responsibility as well. These are obligations just like an employee has, like, oh, I have to go to work. It's like, but besides from that, it's a responsibility at that level. You should. So understanding what these 3 components of commitment are, you can really start to see how it amplifies the design process because you're using a human-centered design to create the most optimal experience. The second E is engagement. And as part of the best practices, you have to ignite the virtual landscape with activity. You have to invite your consumers to engage and see the user's experiences come to fruition. The sports consumers are some of the most insatiable social animals that there are. I hear chatter. It's just like in little hums. It's been known that out of some research that has been done on social media in particular, that 78% of sports fans use social media because of the ease and the access of information and the fact that they can communicate with others. Live tweeting is a thing. So there's a fear of missing out that's going on. But it's not necessarily a fear of missing out on the game because you're watching it. You're employing a second screen at that time. What you're missing out on is the group aspect and that connection. Because sports can be a very isolating, solitary experience where I'm just watching this locked-in guy one-on-one. But there might be a fear of missing out on what are my friends thinking about that play? What are my friends saying about this? So virtual reality, it must have some type of component that's social so that you can have that controllable aspect of, okay, I need to get social for a minute. I need to check in. I need to post a picture. I need to do this. I need to do that. I need to tweet about it. So it can be that mediator that connects psychological need to a specific action and media behavior. And the last E is shockingly experience. Experiences are undefeated to me. And as I wrap this up, you have to be able to turn precious moments like this into a valuable asset. And once you do that, that's when you're able to monetize and you have the best experience overall. There's no expiration date that experiences have, and they last forever. The stories that we tell, the experiences that we share, all of these things are what matters at the end because we can take off a headset, we can get out of the car, we can do any of these things that use technology, but at the end of the day, it's about the experience. And how to make a lasting impression is you have to use the psychology to really get into your consumer's mind and figure out what they want and provide it to them at the best that you can do. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Tunisia. So last, we have Gary Hare. He's going to be speaking to us about the geospatial big data opportunity.
Or not.
Oh, yeah.
Good morning. I'm from San Francisco, and we've never understood why anybody would identify with the Lakers or the Clippers.
Come on.
It's one of the reasons why they drove Tunisia into psychology. I'm also, I'm going to talk to you a little bit this morning about a company and what they're doing. I'm also on the faculty at Fielding University. I focus on political psychology. I just want to say that this has been the most wonderful time in my life to focus on political psychology. And I'm responsible for immersive media and real-time information. How many of you live in the LA area? You remember several months ago when just north of LA, a natural gas well had blown out and they couldn't cap it. In fact, they couldn't cap it for over 100 days. In fact, over 25% of the total pollutants in the state of California were spewing from one well. And people were getting sick. They were 25 and 30 and 35 miles away, and they were getting sick. And the company said, it's a coincidence. It can't be because of that well. Those people are 30 miles away. Well, this happens all over the world. If you're watching CNN the last 2 days or whatever with this move on Mosul, as ISIL tries to retreat, they set the oil wells on fire. And the last time they did this, it actually added 9% of air pollution to the entire globe. So these kinds of issues are big issues, and they basically generate big data. And the question is, what do you do with it? So Scepter was started by people that came out of the satellite industry. They brought together earth scientists and wind scientists and a lot of physicists, and they're doing some interesting stuff. So we see a lot of stuff about IoT and the Internet of Things, and when you go to those conferences, they start talking about things like aggregated data. You know, how do we get as much data as we possibly can and aggregate it? I was on a panel a few years ago about the smart TV and how advertising would aggregate data from a smart TV. And it was fascinating. I don't know if you guys have a smart TV, you know, one of the ones that you can talk to and say, show me. I always thought the smart TV should be able to have a conversation with you, sort of like Siri, and you could say, I'd like to see The Bachelor, and the TV could say, you've already seen it, and you go, I know, I want to see it again, you know, and that kind of stuff. But that has an amazing database of language, which means it can hear you, right? It has to. But it can hear you even when you're not talking to the TV. So if you turn to your friend or your spouse or your kid and say, hey, I think I might buy a truck, and the next ad you see on your TV is for a new GM truck, the TV was paying attention. And it was basically what the conference was about, was the aggregation of this kind of data. Now, we see it all over the place with the Internet of Things, that we're going to be able to collect data on darn near everything. My electricity company is PG&E. You can get light bulbs from them that actually collect data and then tell you what your light bulb usage was, which is something I'm truly not interested in. And all kinds of different ways of collecting and aggregating data. But most of these are driven by advertising. We see it here about the headsets that you wear for VR, to some degree for AR, actually collect data on exactly what you see, on how you pay attention to it, on what kind of experience that they project you might be having. And the idea is to aggregate that data to make better products, and more important, make those products stickier. Scepter's doing something a little bit different. It's an array of satellites with geosensors on the ground that is able to collect environmental and air quality data in near real time at any point on the globe. It's an expensive undertaking, about $350 million. But the idea is that if you have data, you can act on it. You can get people to take action. You can drive people to advocacy. And then the larger question is, how so? So here you just see some of the characteristics of what they're trying to do, some of the mission values, some of these kinds of things. And one of the things that really gets interesting is that when you do something like this, your satellites basically go into orbit about every 100 minutes. So you're getting a fire hose of data of every point on the globe that's being refreshed and renewed every 100 minutes. So what do you do with this stuff? You know, how do you get people to both understand it, be interested in it, take action on it? And that's why I come to AR and VR and other kinds of conferences like this. So one of the things that we know is that people won't act on something that all of these speakers have pointed out that isn't emotionally connected with them. And one of the most difficult things to do, of course, is to get anybody to be emotionally connected with information. We hear many of the panels talk about the need for story, the need for narrative. That's certainly true. But what about information? What do we do with this stuff? There are a lot of situations that would benefit from real-time data, real-time information. And a lot of times with tragic corporate consequences. I mean, Volkswagen shot itself not in one foot, but in both. And yet they had the capacity to actually measure what kind of information was coming out of the tailpipes of their cars. They chose to lie. General Motors is actually looking at a process right now where they have a sensor on every one of their electric vehicles so that they can get data on exactly what that vehicle is doing to the environment. And more people are starting to think like this. But in Scepter's case, we know what we're going to have. We've done our geosensor, sort of spatial sensor information already. So we know what we're going to have. We know what it's going to look like. And it's fodder for 1 million academic and scientific white papers with all kinds of graphs and charts and stuff that no one will ever read other than other scientists never act on and never pay much attention to. And that's when they called me and said, "You're supposed to know how to visualize data, right? You know, and I'm in academia, sort of." And I said, "Well, yeah, of course, I know how to do all those kinds of things." They said, "Okay, how do we visualize what is going to turn out to be an extraordinary amount of near real-time data every day on demand at almost any point on the globe?" Well, there's ways that we can create things so that they can be visualized, but then how do we begin to distribute them? And here's the things that we've looked at so far. And I'll just sort of walk you through the thinking, but I won't give you where we think we'll end up. You can think about that. Augmented reality, as Anna told you, it's the ability basically to put information over something that you're actually seeing. You can be there. We were in Ireland on vacation, and we took that fire loop road. I don't know if anybody has ever done that. And we got terribly lost. And we went down this really long dirt road. And at the end of this dirt road was an old rusted barbed wire fence. And it said, "No trespassing," and the no trespassing sign was really rusted and old. And behind that sign was an extraordinary castle. This ruin of this castle, half fallen down, covered with ivy, absolutely extraordinary. We took pictures and screwed around. There's just my wife and my daughter and I. So my daughter said, "Well, it's a shame that nobody knows what that castle is." So she figured it out, and she did a little AR app. And basically, now every time you can go to that castle, you can pull up the data about it, when it was built, who the king was, all that kind of stuff. We add value, right? to something that you can see out in your backyard, or we've been out on the quad here, and we knew the environmental data, we knew what it was right now, would it cause us to take some sort of action? I'd worked on a water quality project a long time ago where we had water quality data, and we knew that with our smartphone you could walk over to the edge of the ocean, and before you put your foot into that water, we'd be able to display the quality of the water before you let your kid go in it. San Diego County hated this because, by the way, it has the filthiest seawater in the United States. So that's a longer story. But augmented reality is interesting, right? It's interesting because you can display data in real time. Virtual reality may not be quite as interesting for this kind of utilization. It's very difficult to continue to update things in real time. It basically requires a pre-produced, by and large, approach to data. That will change, but I think for the next X number of years, it's probably not the most appropriate thing. We'd probably lean more toward AR than VR for this kind of usage. How many of you know Esri, the geospatial company? Their work is extraordinary. They do all their software, by the way, is free or nearly so. If you want to map something, you want to put data on a map, you want to put a character on a map, you want to lay out a new park in your city, you can do almost anything with Esri data. Probably the most sophisticated mapping software and technology company in the world, and available to all of us to mess around with basically for free. So you can think, gee, wonder if I could take augmented reality or virtual reality and put it in the context of a specific place. And Esri and companies like Esri are the answer. So the idea that I can take something and I can put it over here and you can see it, you can move it, you can walk around it, you can experience it, you can design through it, is extraordinarily powerful. Another approach I really like, and there are several companies that fall into this category, but I like one in particular. The company's name is Moonshadow. When I met the CEO and he told me that he was the CEO of Moonshadow, I told him I was happy to meet him because it was proof that we'd finally run out of names for new companies. But what they do is they can take any 2D information, convert it to 3D, and display it over any mapping technology. So if you want to see something cool, just go and Google Moonshadow in the next couple days and see their demo. What they're doing is extraordinary. There are a number of other companies like that. They just happen to be my favorite technology. And then, of course, raw data. And as I already said, that raw data probably doesn't have any kind of emotional impact, and in this particular instance might not be particularly useful in leading to social advocacy. So you can see where I'm going. I'm thinking, we haven't decided yet, by the way. By the next Digital Hollywood, maybe I can show you what we've come up with. But it's probably going to be a mix between app-driven AR and geospatial display. I mean, I think that's probably where we really need to go. We need to test it, of course. We need to find out what our audience wants once we can give it to them. And what we really want people to do is we want people to both understand and demand action anywhere in the world on the data that they see. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gary. So in just a minute, I'd like to open it up to questions from all of you. But Anna, I just wanted to ask, we're talking about immersive AR environments and that experience as far as being engaged. Can you tell us how you see people experiencing it differently versus TV or, other items like that as far as advocacy content goes?
Yes, absolutely. So I think TV is more of a passive experience where you're being shown the information and you're kind of just ingesting it, whereas an interactive AR display would help you to become more immersed in the experience. So you're not passively just kind of receiving the information, you're actually actively participating in the information and the story itself. So there's a sort of narrative created around being able to immerse yourself in the experience and being able to view things in a more personal way, it puts yourself in the shoes of the experience. So you're actually embodying the emotional experience, and you get to have those feelings of empathy and things like that. If you were to watch if you see a beautiful temple and then you're watching it get destroyed, you're gonna have an emotional response to that. And it's much more powerful if you're actually feeling like you're watching it before your eyes than if you're just kind of flipping through channels, passively seeing something happen. It creates a distance, exactly.
Thank you. And Tunisia, could you tell me, what does identity research mean for VR, especially in the sports world?
Well, it kind of reiterates some of the topics that I brought up, but you have to know your audience and know what their expectations are and how deep of a fan are we talking about, because there are so many different levels of affiliation. There's the highly affiliated, like super fan, all the way down to your casual non-fan. They're just there because they got a free ticket or something. But the identity research, it'll help you figure out whether or not, all right, what kind of extra content can I create that will meet something in the middle? Something in the middle of that casual, moderate fan that wants to be either social at some aspects and then maybe wants to be just totally locked in and immersed and not worrying about anything else. Especially because if we're talking about you're at a game and you want to have some type of added immersive experience, I don't know about you, but most times if I'm at the game, the phone's in my pocket. I am not watching it at all. It's all about the game. That's what I'm watching. But if there's a way to merge your experiences where, all right, if it's going to add to the content, then maybe it'll be a little bit worthwhile to actually like put on some lenses or use something else. So if you're at home, it's all about adding to the experience as opposed to trying to replace it with something else, because nothing's going to replace the actual live event. Nothing will do that. But what VR and AR can do for sports is boost and amplify that experience with additive content, because the whole point is you don't want to replace the game, you want to add to it and increase the overall experience. So identity research is important because you have to figure out like who we're talking to. Who am I going to put this headset on? Who am I, like, what are the needs and the values, and what do they ask, what do they look into? Because in sports, it's not just the game that's going on, but there's pre-game, post-game, feature stories, all of this shoulder content and what's called shoulder programming in entertainment, because that's where the heart is. It holds up the event. It supports the event, which is the head, the game. So all of this extra shoulder content, that's why there's 19 ESPNs and Fox Sports, because it's all of this extra pre-post feature stories that gets you emotionally connected. So once you know how to emotionally connect to these fans, then you can use that research to inform the design of how I'm going to use immersive media.
Great. And Gary, what do you think is the most exciting, either right now or right on the horizon, for the real-time data, especially in the environmental area?
I think it's when it comes to not just environmental stuff, but almost anything that we look at that's social advocacy, the more real-time, the better. When you look at some of the stuff that's been done with VR and with some of the refugees and some of the natural disasters and the crises sort of intervention, one thing is that you massively increased contributions to the Red Cross and other agencies instantaneously. In the recent crisis in Indonesia, they got 400% more people, more money being contributed to them, largely because they did a 360 video kind of thing and then put it on YouTube. I mean, it wasn't that we were really experiencing it in 3D. So we can make these things quite real. As you know, I'm working with you on some stuff with the Department of Defense and Department of State, and they're concerned about having a all-volunteer army and having the rest of us sort of understand the fog of war, and that it's not fun. It's not, there are no parades, there are no victors, there are a lot of victims. And so our own military is saying, how do we get our own population to understand this? And I think that's what technology can do. It's what real-time information to a degree can do. Right now, I mean, my interest is you have to focus on something. So my interest is largely on environmental issues, and I was just lucky. I mean, this is probably the most interesting and compelling and long-term thing I've been involved in 20 years. So I was just lucky, but it's great stuff.
Thank you. And Linda, you know, you talked to us about the device management, so to speak, that idea. What do you see as the effects on the brain as far as being in that constant state of crisis?
Well, as you've heard a lot of the panel speak, emotion is the key to memory and coding, which is, if you're designing something, that's what you want people to do, is to remember your product clearly. But there is an overload component to it, and the immersive environment feels real and appears the same to the brain. So what's really important is the brain treats it as real. I was just at the Stanford Virtual Lab a couple weeks ago and seeing Jeremy Bailenson work. And one study, was kind of interesting, where they took people and they showed them real-life supermodels, and they were looking at how the neurons fire when they are viewing real-life supermodels. And then they showed them in a VR experience real-life supermodels, and the brain couldn't distinguish the difference. The neurons that fired were the same. So it brings up the question, you know, what exactly in this virtual environment is it different than real life? And it appears in a lot of cases when emotion is concerned, it is not. And that's why we need to be so careful about what kind of emotional experience that we either subject ourselves to or create for others, because we really don't understand the long-term effect it has on the brain. But right now it appears that the brain cannot distinguish between virtual life and real life.
Question to that. So can I extrapolate from that?
Yes.
You would be saying that you would need a sort of conscious cognitive override, so to speak, to make that distinction. In other words, if we put on a VR headset, you know, and we're in the demo hall, right? And so and we would have the ability to say, I know that's a VR experience, even if it triggered an emotional reaction. So what that implies then is that you have to have the self-restraint or the self-control or the maturity, developmental maturity, to have cognitive override.
Can you,
Exactly.
Jerry Lynn, can you repeat the question, because they're trying to live stream the,
Yes.
make it short.
Linda, you seem to understand exactly where she's going. Can you make
Yes,
her
well,
soundbite her question
So
first?
the effects the brain has, and like you were saying, yes, you know enough that says this is not real life. So if has anybody walked the plank in virtual reality? Okay, you know, okay, I'm walking the plank, this isn't real. But your brain, your feeling, your prefrontal cortex is firing off your cortisol because you're scared. You know, they say go ahead and jump off. You're scared. So your brain is going, hell, I'm scared. So you've got your cortisols firing off. Your prefrontal cortex is going, what the? But you know you're not going to fall anywhere. But your brain doesn't really quite know that. So there's this, not a disconnect, I don't want to say that. But I think there is a real responsibility to understand the neurophysiological effects that is happening here. Now, when I was in the Stanford lab, a guy jumped off the plank. And I was watching him jump, and I had a reaction. Because I saw it on the screen. I wasn't even in the environment. I was just watching a bystander, and I went like, oh, dude, you jumped. And I asked him afterwards, and I said, did anybody here jump? No. Wow, hats off. Because I asked the guy, I said, what did that feel like when you jumped? He said, well, I'm not going to tell you what he said. He was scared. And that registers in the brain. And even though you, like you said, you know enough to say that's not real, but the brain's going, hey, real life, it feels real to me. I'm sorry, you had a question?
Yes.
Has there been any research into the temporal aspect of it? So after the experience, when you know that it wasn't a real experience, do you code it differently?
So the question he's asking is, after the experience, do you code it differently when you know it's that idea of virtual versus reality?
No, I don't think they have. I mean, the research that they, and that would be a really great study of research, unless you know of one that has. I don't.
You know, it sort of gets into presence research, you know, so that we know that I'm going to be able to recall and have a more of an emotional connection with an experience if there's another human being involved. And this goes to presence, and of course a lot of the VR kinds of applications are very interested in this. If you want to just get some free data and white papers on that, you can go to WorldViz, WORDVIZ, and they've been in business for a long time, and they're doing a lot of research. They do a lot of presence research. They do a lot of haptics research. They probably have the only VR environment where multiple people can be in the environment at the same time and you know they're there. So they're very interested in that, you know, and to see now what they haven't done. In fact, the fellow that's maybe here today, guys here at the conference, what they haven't done, and I don't know that anyone's done, is to say that when I have a virtual experience, will I remember it as vividly and for as long than if I had that same experience in the real world? And I think that's what you're asking, and this is what you probably should do your dissertation on.
He's one of our new students. Again, that was WorldViz. Other questions? Yes. WorldViz, V-I-Z. Yeah. Yes. Just, okay. Go.
Yes, yesterday somebody had a comment that they took their child to a lot of different virtual experiences, and one of them actually was one that the child hadn't gone to. They went to Disneyland, and the child, who was about 4 or 5, said, "Hey, Dad, remember when we went to Disneyland?" I said, "We never went to Disneyland." "Oh, that's right. That we went there virtually." What does this mean for things like testimony and memories, and when it comes time to decide whether something really happened or not? We've all had dreams that we thought were real, and realized, oh, that was a dream. Is this going to be more difficult to separate?
Okay, so the question really has to do, if I understand you right, it has to do with experiences that you have in a virtual environment and being able to distinguish the difference, especially childlike, of what's real and what didn't, actually happened and what happened in a virtual environment, and how we're going to be able to distinguish that. Does someone want to take that one?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting that the brain does treat it as real, and they're finding that some effective treatments that they've actually used VR for with the military is to treating PTSD. So it's a multi-layered treatment, of course. I don't want to, make light of the complexity of it. But one of the things they're finding is the use of actually implanting new memories. That's, I don't want to call it override, but kind of like that, override the traumatic memories. So in a sense, in that case, good job. It's actually helping somebody cope better in life. And I can see the application, as can a lot of people, using VR to manage, for a better word, traumatic memories. Now, you've got the other side, and that's VR for good. And then you've got the other side where, what are people going to do with that? Are they going to let a 6-year-old look at something like a Call of Duty? And then 10 years later, is that child actually going to think they did what they saw in Call of Duty? I don't know. And I hope that people will be smart enough not to allow a child to look at that. So we don't know enough yet. The research is still very new. But what they're finding is they can use it actually to create new memories and to take away painful other ones. So you can kind of extrapolate it from there.
Yeah, I think that a long time ago there was a lot of research being done on maps of the mind, and there was a jeweler here in Los Angeles. He had a bunch of jewelry stores, and he sold them, made a lot of money, and trying to figure out what he might like to do. And he heard that a lot of the inner city kids in LA had never been to the beach, and he thought, that's insane, So what he started doing is just taking kids places. And take them to the beach, take them to the mountains, take them to the museum, take them anywhere, just take kids places. And so when they did research on this, and they asked kids, in this case they were elementary school kids, they'd ask them to draw a picture of their neighborhood, or draw a picture of their world, or draw a picture of the things that they remembered. And so the middle class and upper middle class, mostly white kids, they'd been to Hawaii once, or their parents took them to Tahoe or something. So their map of their world is relatively large. And the inner city kids, in many cases, the map of their world was only a mile. You know, the store, the path to school, maybe the church. And so what he wanted to do is see if he could make those maps expand. And I think, you know, he demonstrated it. There's a great book written about him called Maps of the Mind. And maybe we could do that, you know, to an extent with virtual experiences. I don't know that your early experience and not having actually gone to Disneyland is imprinted on you. I don't know. You know, maybe it is. I mean, have you ever? I've done this where you know you start telling a story about your father or your grandfather. You're really like, remember when? You know, and the only reason I remember it is they showed me a photograph when I was 4 years old. I don't remember it, but I thought I did, so that was just as good. And maybe that's what we're doing with a lot of this stuff.
Okay, the gentleman just behind that last question.
Yeah, just a quick question. I'm extremely new to your work, Untitled Chapter. I'm just wondering, in terms of you're sort of talking about the limits of engagement. You know, people write a million white papers and they don't never go anywhere. So I guess in terms of your future thinking, from an environmental/political standpoint, let's say we have AR where we can see pollution anywhere on the planet, and we're looking at a country like China, you know, Beijing. How does that actually get at the power structure that's causing that pollution that can close all of Beijing? Like, how do we actually like make a dent in that wall based on what you're doing?
So-
That's my question.
So I think the
We-
question is, you know, we have a lot of data already in white papers, et cetera, and now Gary's talking about the fact that we would have real-time data and know areas of pollution, et cetera, but then where's that missing link that then can shift change in the higher structure?
Yeah, the greatest interest we've gotten from this so far, from a country point of view, is the EU, China, and Canada, and our own EPA. Now, people recognize they have a problem, you know, and to some extent they think they have an idea of what they might be able to do about it. Unfortunately, most governments are pretty good at responding to stuff that's very short term and very immediate, you know, a flood in Tennessee, and pretty bad about responding to stuff that's going to take a decade or two or three. And so I think that we can get to that infrastructure. One of the biggest things is the financial thing, and I don't want to dominate this. They have a lot of other stuff, but financially, you know, what are the costs and benefits? So one of the things that I worked on for the first several months is this actually makes the budding cap and trade market in the California real, and so that if you can really quantify exactly the pollutants at exactly the spot that are being spewed from someplace or another, you can put a price on it, and if you can put a price on it, you've got the people, you know, the pay side of cap and trade, and so that's one of the things we're working on. It's a complex kind of thing. I don't think in the big scheme of things that governments will be the biggest problem as long as you can suggest what they can do about it.
Other questions? Yes.
We work on the ethics of VR, because all these questions about the children and all of that, and especially, as you say, the good side, the bad side, who's doing the work now about the ethical impact of VR? You scared me.
Well, you know, that's
So the
probably a
question
good
is
thing.
about the ethical impact of AR and who's doing the research. And I think Linda has some answers, but I did want to also say that I'm past president of the American Psychological Association for Media Psychology and Technology, and we are definitely starting, but it is still a relatively new area because we're sort of pacing right along with it. But Linda, yes.
No, and Dr. Hogg is actually right. She is very involved in the ethical constraints. Then there should be constraints. And when I said, you know, you said that you scared me, and in a way, I'm kind of glad that I did. I didn't want your cortisol levels to fire off. I'm sorry about that. But in a way, I think we do need to take a step back, and we need to be very conservative about this. And I think we need to be very, very aware, and especially the people creating content. And because we all really are content creators, I was just watching Ani here take a picture, and whatever she's doing right away. I mean, she's creating content as she's speaking up here. We're all content creators. So we all have to understand the ethical perspective of this. What are we allowing ourselves to experience? Like, Pam was saying, what are we allowing ourselves to experience? Knowing what I know about the brain and what it does to ourselves, what are we allowing for, ourselves? But then what do we allow our children? And then our community, and then our students, and what is our ethical responsibility, and what can we do, if anything? And it comes down to a multi-tier approach to it. In your area of expertise, I'm not familiar, see what you can do, write about it, blog about it, ask the good questions like you are here, see what you can do and advance it. Because right now technology is totally out in front of any laws, any real ethical, constraints in place. At this point, it's just out in front of it. And that's not a good place for it to be, I think. But it is what it is, and we all work at it in our own
I
way.
was just about to say, because we're still in this early adopter stage, this type of research is still being done. It's being done as the technology is being done. So it's almost like the ethical board is trying to keep up with the technology, but the technology keeps changing. So it has to evolve, and we're just going to keep trying to follow along. But we're going to start to see a rating system with virtual reality content. That's going to have to come. That's just it's in the works. But things like
and
that.
More information and more information from us when we speak about it. As we get more information, we'll speak as well. And I think it's just a process of education. But it seems like almost everybody here has had an experience in VR. You guys know right away. Would you want your children to watch this? And under what conditions? For how long? It's something that you need to take control of as well in your own environment.
So we're down to our last minute, and I just want to...
Could I say one thing about that? We were at a dinner last night, and every single speaker agreed that there should absolutely be no limits put on technology. And I think it's sort of universal, we go back to any technology, and I think people would say that. And it's so difficult to do actual research with kids. It's kind of illegal in most cases. So we're going to have to make some guesses. And we know of people that are trying to work on rating systems, much like we have for TV and film. Don't know how effective that is. But the ethical use of stuff like that is going to be really interesting.
Yeah, I think we need to make it as research-based as possible. Unfortunately, we are out of time. We're getting from the back. So I just real quick takeaway.
Be scared. Be very no.
Be very
Think of everything for good. Technology for good. VR for good. Human beings for good. Always look on the good side, but prepare for the worst, I suppose. But like the debates tonight. But let's hope for the best.
And the game.
Anna?
I agree.
Okay. Tanisha?
Experiences are undefeated.
And Gary?
Never speak before noon.
Thank you all for being here today.
Thank you.